What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. Got asked a great question on the Twitters concerning reaching your full potential, right? As a musician, as a guitar player. How do you do that? How do you know if you're actually hitting your full potential? That's just it. Like, most of us aren't. And I'm going to concentrate more on the negatives, if you will, because these are easier to explain than the positives. Because otherwise, I'd just be blowing smoke up your ass and being like, yeah, man, be positive about your practice session and all this other nonsense. And that's not what you need to hear right now. Essentially, number one is honesty. Honesty with the self. That you're not putting as much time or effort into it as you should be. And here's the other one. You're not really practicing creatively, meaning that this skill set's going to translate over to a real world music situation. You can play. You got the chords down, you can do covers and all the rest of that stuff, but then there's this gray area, the fog, if you will, that you have to cross before you really get comfortable playing with the band and just sort of being more like a Van Halen type guitar player rather than just the rhythm guitar player with another lead guitar player, right? So, that's a difficult pill to swallow, really, for a lot of people because they just don't want to admit it. There's a glass ceiling there also with respect to theory. It's this irrational fear where people are like, I don't want to, or I won't, or I don't need it. I want you pick one. They're just like adamantly against sort of adding this skill set, even though most theoretical concepts are pretty straightforward. You do not have to get into like really complex theory. Instead, you can use big words like superimposition, but that means nothing if you don't actually understand what that, how that affects, the way you're laying out scale forms and whatnot on the fretboard, right? Superimposition does something to that inherently. So without music theory, it's useless. You know what I mean? The key is just not there. Consequently, this higher order knowledge just essentially stays beyond most people's grasp, which kills the enjoyment of playing music because they're not learning anything new, because they can't organize their practice sessions to sort of reflect their real world goals, which is just play music rather than just play along to songs. You know what I mean? It's like an artist being like, here's paint by numbers, just fill it in. Fill in the the crayon book here, and just draw me a picture, whatever you feel like. One day it's this cool comic, and the next day it's like this interesting pastel, and then the day after that it's a watercolor. You know what I mean? You have the choice to just express yourself as you sort of feel in the moment. And that seems to be a concept that goes beyond most people because they're like, well, can you show me this magic power? And it's not really magic. It's how you orient your thinking with respect to when you're playing music. People expect that stuff just to magically appear out of nowhere. Instead, you have to train your mind to be like, I need to be the driving force to, put myself in the direction that I want my music to sound. If it's happy and upbeat or stuff, I'm going this way. If it's sad or whatever else, it's going this way. And you basically adjust and create the tempo just like you'd create a sentence of words to convey an idea or an emotion or make a description of something. You're just doing the same thing with sounds. And we do that by taking the scales, the music equivalent of words, and we have all kinds of different ones. We have scales, we have intervals, we have triads, dominant 7 chords, altered dominance, extended dominance. You know what I'm saying? We have ways of arranging them. There's this whole new language that sort of pops up, just like the rules of math. But again, too many people lack clarity and honesty to be like, okay, what am I really trying to accomplish when I practice? Am I really invested into this endeavor? Do I actually sit down and think about what I'm doing? Oh, I'm playing in this scale shape. I want to go here. Maybe I should try moving to a sympathetic key. There's another one. You see this when you're taught things through the internet, like, oh, play this lick and stuff like that. You're like playing this pentatonic. You're like, it sounds great. And then you're like, now what? Well, the next thing should be like, oh, well, I can probably tie this with some sort of sympathetic key and create a loop. What I call at least, a musical loop, where there's like a destabilization effect that actually resolves itself, you know? Like the musical equivalent to an Ouroboros. The snake eating its own tail. And completing that loop there essentially is the essence of music. Finding two complementary sort of elements and putting them together to create like this really pleasing musical effect. It's like alchemy, if you will. So that's what you got to practice. The ability to do that. And as you play those scale shapes and arpeggio shapes and chords over and over and over again, you should be cataloging them. Like, you know, like some weird insect dude catalogs bugs. You go into a study there and there's just thousands and thousands of bugs pinned to stuff. And you're just like, wow, right? He's got them all cataloged and described and all the rest. You got to kind of have the same mindset. But we temper it with the more sort of fast and loose approach to how we put them together. These guys are way more methodical, so their system's very rigid. But we're like, well, we have these tools over here, and then we just kind of, you know, rummage around in the toolbox and just grab whatever. We're like, yeah, that'll work, and then just do it. And it's weird. I can tell you right now that the great sort of improvisers, the Charlie Parkers, like the guys from the jazz age that were just insane, super high level thinkers when it came to music and whatnot. They all tried to boil things down to like lowest common denominators and start basing everything that they were doing off that. And then that really simplifies. To get more out of playing guitar, you have to actually see things in bigger and bigger chunks. Not just, oh, major, minor, diminished, and augmented, just triads. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, I got to move to do some sort of triad idea, and then it's expected that you're already going to know all the moves. You know what I'm getting at? And then you're like, oh, I'm going to use superimposition in triads. So now you're going to do two things at once, which makes it even more complicated, right? And you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to do superimposition. I'm going to use triads, but then I'm going to use diminished theory. You know, the final boss. And you're done. So that's my point, is you can take it to an extreme if you want to, but the idea here is that you have to train your mind to be like both a creative engine, just something to be like, come up with something in the moment. And usually you're receiving like some sort of feedback loop, right? You're listening to music, unless you want to just play solo, which is fine too. But then again, you're reacting to your own playing, or it should be, right? So that's number one. That's why you're not reaching your full potential. Has nothing to do with your practice schedule or whatever else. It's when you sit down and you do practice, it's kind of unfocused and you just kind of go through the motions, or you sit down and watch a video, or you'll play like you learn the part of a solo or whatever it is. You might even do some ear training or something like that. It's another one, right? Just basic theoretical stuff, ear training, scales, intervals, triads, the various versions, mapping them up with caged and whatnot. The different types of chords and whatnot. That I can't even begin to tell you how important that is in the big picture, because I skipped over it for years, and then it wasn't until the tail end that I was like, you know, if I'd kept up with this one here, then I'd be like a trillion times better. Everything is triggered from one of those positions, like a whole series of potentialities, different elements being introduced over top of where this chord is being played, based on a modal position if you're doing scales, right? Based on a scale degree, if you're working with chords, you can do 2-5-1s and secondary dominants and a whole bunch of stuff. And that right there is the power, if you will, of knowledge being applied in the real world instantaneously. And a lot of times it's trial and error, but it's just you kind of get used to these sounds because they're fairly predictable. And you can lump them together again. You could like major 7 and minor 7 are not really two different arpeggios. They're like the same coin with two different sides. They kind of accomplish the same goal. So when you start messing with them like that, you're just like, wow, okay. That's unexpected, right? And it sounds awesome. So you see what I mean? Again, you're sort of like taking two elements and synergizing them together as one element now as your understanding to be like, oh, here, this is going to sound the best, but over here, maybe once in a while, or try to find a variant. And then, yeah, down here is not too bad either. Right? And there it is. And then you can start to apply music theory like tension and release, like chord progressions, movements, if you will, phrasing. You know, and what I would call mirroring, where you basically have various parts, song A, song B, or part A, part B. You see this in classical music all the time. They start off with one thing, but then they do something completely different, but that complements it and then allows it to tie back to this first part. So they go A, B, and then end with A again. And that right there is, you know, a very, very astute way of looking at music, because you get all of the elements being mixed into a practice session in one shot. Again, just practicing scales or arpeggios, or even just calling out the names of the systems, of the modal names, if you will, with respect to the scales, or the, you know, the various forms of arpeggios and inversions. That's great and everything like that, but then there has to be this next level of thinking where you're like, okay, how do I arrange these elements in a way to create a continuous piece of music that might span, say, 8 bars? So that's basically 8 different instances of various elements. So you start off with a scale, and you like do another scale, but now from the harmonic minor that complements this original one, that lets you create tension to jump off to this arpeggio now. And then you're going to do an arpeggio sequence into the next element where you're going to resolve the tension or whatever, or create tension from this previously stable arpeggio. You see what I mean? You're like, oh, I'm already playing a major 7. That's a pretty, you know, stable sound. It's a little off kilter, but you like to really keep going. If I just play another minor 7 or dominant 7 or something like that, it just won't sound as impactful. It'll just sort of sound like more of the same. Slightly different, but not enough. You need something to really reach out and grab the listener and be like, oh, this is the next section. And that's important, having some sort of definitive break, so that you can actually set your solos up so they're based on sort of a feel and a motif, rather than just a series of scalar exercises, you know, where you just play like Mach 17. I mean, that's important too. I was talking about that with someone else. They're like, well, you know, they're just playing things, but they were playing them relatively fast and whatnot, or just technical elements. And I'm like, that's not music, really. That's just an element within music, right? And that's just it. You have to balance the more technical elements with the more melodic ones. So you need a melody, which leads into a flurry of arpeggios that sets up the next part of the melody or something new. You see what I mean? Everything sort of leads to this idea that I'm going to start here, gonna do something, I'm gonna end up over here, and then that's either the end, or I'm like, and now I'm just gonna jump off and do something else. And that's how you have to see it. If it's the end, do this. If it's gonna keep going, then do this. You see what I mean? It's like choose your own adventure kind of situation, except it's always that binary, and you just keep going again and again and again. And every time you do that, think of it as like a slot machine, but all of a sudden the cherry pulls up and you were trying to get the rest of the cherries, but you're like, you know, this combination here also works great. So you're like, this makes more sense right now. And you just do that one. You know, it's a bad analogy because, you know, you would think it's random, but I'm just like, if you could stop those things in the sequence that you want, you're like, okay, I want a cherry here first. But then the pyramid, and then finally the palm tree or whatever it is, right? That combination makes more sense to me because of Viva Las Vegas or whatever it is. So that's my point, is you have to be flexible. And the thing is like most people don't train their minds to be flexible. They're like a Rolodex of internalized licks, like canned licks and stuff like that. They can't really break out of their shell, musically speaking, because there's nothing to break into musically. You know what I mean? They haven't practiced the skill. It's a skill to be musical, to take a whole bunch of these music elements and put them together, which is why if you go to a music store and you sit there for any time, you hear people play a bunch of riffs and licks and stuff like that, but it's very rare that you see a musician go in there and just pick it up and basically play a piece of music, even if it's just improvised. You know what I mean? It's almost always, oh, well, check out this soloing idea or whatever else it is. You know what I mean? Not just blending it in there. And of course, when you watch the best guys on the internet, that's exactly what they're doing. They'll play a chord, they'll sort of set themselves out, or a series of chords, and then they'll go into some sort of lead idea. And that right there should tell you everything you need to know about music. There's this whole series of events that went on between the chord part and the scale part. And you might start out with just playing a chord and then playing the scale. And over the years, you start extending that out there by adding more little divisions in between, right? To be like, oh, I can start here and then play an inversion here and here, and then play a secondary dominant, and that sets up perfectly for me to flop over here to the scale now. Now, all of a sudden, you're cooking with gas. But it takes a while to get there, and obviously, it's not just about memorization. It's about honing your skills from an ear training perspective, but how do you actually train your ear to hear those more killer sounds if your theory knowledge is weak? You're not going to. You need it. You need that to be able to be like, this is how I get those more higher order sounds that everybody wants. That is the big reveal. Without theory, you're not getting half as far as you think you are. You'll do pretty good, but unless you're Alan Holdsworth, and as far as I know, he was the one and only man. You know, just like I said, some people got it, and we ain't got it. So we got to use all the tools at our disposal to basically recreate the greatness, or try. And you do that by basically, yeah, of course, you're going to incorporate every tool that you possibly can to help you be a better musician, which includes music theory. So you can use things like superimposition. So you can use things like the melodic minor, which is, again, a very complex scale system that requires a whole bunch of considerations before you can actually use it. It's not like 3 notes per string using the major modes, right, and just blow through stuff. Oh, yeah, that always sounds good. Try doing that with the, layering the melodic minor over top of the Aeolian or Dorian. It's just going to sound absolutely brutal in places. You'll be like, there's something fundamentally wrong here, right? And that's my point. Once you hear that, that's when your brain should just immediately take in this information, be like, there's something I'm missing here. Then the question is do you have what it takes to figure it out? Or are you just going to go to the internet and ask somebody to basically show you? Because I'll tell you this right now, almost 99% of musicians will be like, I can't really tell you what it is exactly. It's just like a feeling when you start playing it. You just start hearing it and you're like, that sounds right. You know what I mean? It's like that dude on the internet, and I'll leave it at this. He's some crazy Asian dude, and this person just shows up. I've seen it a couple times with a couple different colors, and they just hold out this thing and they're like, I want this color. And he will just take his little paint bottles and just randomly squirt stuff in there and stir it up, and basically it's the color. Now how he does that, I don't know. To me, that doesn't work. But to him, it makes total sense. You know what I mean? And that's just it. That's our job now. I'm sure he can do that awesomely with colors. Come on over here to music, and then all of a sudden, I'm king of whatever the mountain, right? Because I have this superpower, because my sense of training with respect to my ears and my mind and syncing it up with the physicality has been highly tuned. And that's the whole point. You got to stop just going through exercises, instead sort of break out of this cage that you've built for yourself and then stretch wings, if you will, to become a musician, and just take chances and be more flexible about your practice sessions, but you're being more focused creatively. Like, I want to combine a whole bunch of different elements together and just be like, start off with 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're opening two sort of intermediary movements, but then the second to last one's obviously most likely going to be a cadence for you to end on the last chord, either the first chord again or something else, or a different key altogether. And that's my point. That's focused practice, where you're sort of looking for creative output, and then you're like, I'm going to do with some chords first. Then you're like, I'm going to turn those chords into arpeggios next. And then I'm going to turn the arpeggios into dominant 7 arpeggios. And then last but not least, you're going to be like, I'm going to do it with scales now. And I'm going to use superimposition and various scale systems to make it sound as interesting as possible and try to understand that. And there it is. That's the final sort of boss. And once you start practicing like that, and you sit down and you listen to a piece of music, and then you start learning it by ear instantaneously, you just start playing along. If you've watched the Rick Beato videos, I do it all the time too. Same diff. You just get good enough with the ear training that you can hear a piece of music and be like, okay, I automatically know what those chords are. It's just done deal. I've played them millions of times, okay? So absolutely know what that sounds like. And that's all there is to it. And once you start to cultivate your mindset, and then of course the next step is this, oh look, they're the open chords from caged, and then all of a sudden you understand what caged actually means, in terms of breaking down the fretboard in regions. And then afterwards you're like, that's the G, the 1 chord. And you're like, that's the D, the 5 chord. There's the C, the 4 chord, right? You see how everything kind of takes another step up? You're like, that's the theoretical sort of information, and that's just it. That's as far as the theory really needs to go. But then you can be like, that's the Ionian position, moving to Mixolydian, moving to Lydian. That is the end of the video. Right. So focus more on basically, maximizing your practice sessions so that you get the most out of the creative elements, you taking some sort of problem, music, math, and just putting it to paper instantaneously, be like, do this right now. Play an idea with chords and scales, chord, scale, chord, scale, chord. So that's like 5 elements, 6 elements, whatever it is, and get her done diatonically in the key of D flat major. Go. And just put your fingers on the fretboard, be like, starting with the A chord, I'm going to alternate between A and D's. Now you've got all the elements you need to basically create a creative practice exercise. And if you fail, then go back to the start and then math it out. Best practice session you'll ever have. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. We'll see you in the next one.